Hello and welcome to another tutorial on stylizing this entire scene. Now in the previous video we set up the initial shading for our 3D scene to look like, at least color-wise, something similar as our reference color key. Now what we must do is to continue with the stylization. Now in this shot we have the advantage that the camera is static throughout the animation. That means that we don't necessarily need to paint each individual element in the background. We can just stylize a plane, a proxy plane in front of them, and it's still gonna look right. In case we were to have a camera movement, like for example from the left to the right, if we wanted the effects to be attached to the objects, we would need to paint each individual object in the scene. But this is not the case, thankfully, in this shot. So we can stylize this very quickly by using proxies. Now, to best create proxies, we're gonna swap the views that we have in these two panels. We're gonna have the shot cam here in this small panel here. Let me disable this. And we're gonna have the perspective camera in here. This will allow us to work much faster. So now that we have this here and we have our camera view, I'm gonna remove the lights. All right, let's get started by adding a few proxies. Proxies are invisible objects in the scene that help you to stylize many elements at once by using these invisible objects. There's a tutorial already available for that, so I'm just gonna create them and stylize them here without much explanation. So I first create a plane, I'm gonna bring it back here, make this bigger. So proxies can be any sort of objects. They can be planes, they can be spheres, they can be cache that moves in certain ways. So there's many ways to create proxies. So proxies are very flexible in that sense. I'm just creating a proxy that roughly covers the area, or rather the framing of the shot. And the important thing also is that if you're planning on using PaintFX later on, PaintFX are assigned per vertex. So make sure that you have enough vertices for you to add certain effects later on. Because of that, I'm actually gonna modify this polyplane. I'm gonna increase the subdivisions to 20. That way we have a higher resolution, more vertices to assign effects later on. I'm gonna stick with this. Proxies are invisible objects, as I was mentioning earlier. So we can also accumulate different proxies. I'm gonna emulate this dreamy depth of field like with color bleeding. But as you can see, the characters at certain points are bled, like here in the pants, but certain other parts are sharp, like this area here. The same goes here. Totti is pretty much in sharpness all along, but right in front we already see some bleeding, and the further back you go, you see even more bleeding, where at some point it just becomes something very abstract. And this is exactly what we want to achieve. I'm gonna create one proxy here, actually a bit closer, pretty much after the plane where the characters are interacting, so that even this lamp here will be bled. Then I'm gonna duplicate this plane and I'm gonna push another one further back. I'm gonna make this bigger. This one's proxy 2 and this one's proxy 3. Okay, and we may need to make this also much bigger because it's further at the back. We need this to cover whatever we wanted to stylize. Now we go to the left and make this wider. Now this proxy is also covering everything that's behind. Let's go here, and there's gonna be smaller proxies in the foreground as well, but we'll work with these two first. The first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna work from the front to the back. So proxy 2 is this one here. I'm gonna open the material presets, and then I'm gonna add a proxy preset on this object. Now, ideally, you will also want to delete the history of it so that we don't have construction history. It's a bit cleaner and makes our scenes lighter, especially if they have a lot of proxies. We create a proxy. As you can see, now it's transparent. We can see what's behind. But the cool thing about it now is that we can come and add some noise effects to them. Now there's another tutorial that goes in depth into noise effects. I'm gonna assume you know what these handles do and I'm gonna use it. So first of all, I'm gonna add some color bleeding. I'm gonna shift everything up, and then I'm gonna modify the scale to add some variation to the color bleeding. Now if you want to see how this scale looks like, you can always toggle on this button here. This is to view the control parameters. And then when you click and drag the scale, you're seeing what the scale of the noise looks like. So like this is a very low frequency, and if you push it this way, you're having a much higher frequency noise. So I would just go for whatever works best for your shot. I want some variation, but not that high frequency. Something like this should be fine. So now that we have set up the first proxy, I'm also going to add some pigment turbulence. I want to have certain parts darker than others and so forth. So I'm going to come here and add some pigment turbulence as well. We can remove this to actually see better what we're affecting. And you can see we have the turbulence here coming up in the plane, and we're directly affecting our view. If you want it to be more precise, you can also just look at this. This is our shot, and we have a much better view of how the frequency is looking like. So I'm gonna enable this again and modify the scale. I definitely want this to be higher frequency, something like this, so that we have some variation you see in the background, in the building as well. So it gives this nice overall look. And I'm also gonna add some granulation. At this point, I'm rather playing with the stylization, and since everything's done in real time, I can see what works and what doesn't work very easily. So just have it like that. And I'm also gonna modify a little bit the edge darkening, add some variations. Some parts will be darker, some others won't. So I'm gonna come here and also enable some edge darkening. I need to see what this is doing. This is the green channel and the red channel, both at the same time. So let's have it like that. This will add some subtlety into, for example, this edge darkening is thicker than this one here and so forth. So I'm just adding some fluctuations to it. So now that we have that, I want to do the other proxy, the one that's behind. So I just go to perspective view. This is the first proxy. Again, this only works because the camera is not moving. If the camera would be moving and you have a proxy static, you might see that there's like a window kind of thing. In more precise terms, this is called a shower door effect. So it looks like a shower that is sliding in front of you. Let's unhide the proxy 3, open this back again, and double click on proxy. And this proxy is gonna help us do some refinement on the further back. Let me bring in the shot cam. And as you can see, we have some edge darkening here, which looks kind of cool, but doesn't necessarily represent our source image. We can work on that. We actually don't need this perspective view. It's just making both viewports flicker. So let's just remove that and make this a bit bigger. So as you can see, there's not much detail in the background, and the edge darkening here is not really bringing us closer to what we have here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna also add further color bleeding. And as you can see, you start seeing something funky happening here. And that is because color bleeding and granulation cannot really coexist very well. So you need to take that into account. So we could take the proxy 2 and remove the granulation. Or if you like this, you can also keep it. For now, I'm gonna keep it because it does kind of bring it some hard edges on the noise, which could represent spots of pigment accumulating there and not somewhere else. So it can also help your watercolor style as well. Let me look at the scale. I enable this and I'm gonna make it like that. I just realized that the proxy 3 is not fully covering our frame. So I'm gonna select it and I'm gonna bring it further up so that we have our entire framing covered. We don't need this anymore. Let's continue stylizing this. We don't need this. So now we only have some vague hints of it. It might be too strong in the front. So I'm gonna pick the proxy 2 and I'm gonna reduce the bleeding a bit. There we go. Now we have some more detail here and some detail in the background, which is kind of cool. It shows off a bit of the background, but then also bleeds things as well. I really like that. Now you will notice that this part here is way too sharp. Now we can do two things about it. We can either use PaintFX to modify that within the same proxy, or we can create another proxy. In this case, I'm gonna go for the PaintFX just to showcase another tool. So I'm opening up the PaintFX. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I had my window outside. So the PaintFX is just using the same tool as the noise effects. We were modifying here the sliders. The PaintFX is simply in another tab and allows you to paint the effects on each vertex. So it's not procedural anymore like we were doing with this noise. It's more localized. It allows you a much finer control over things. So I'm gonna go here, and most of all, this is just bled. So I'm just gonna grab the color bleeding brush and then gonna make this bigger, gonna make a different brush stamp, and I'm just gonna paint on top. Let me increase the brush influence. And now I can literally paint over the objects without painting the objects themselves. The other way to go about this would be to grab each individual object and paint on top of them, but since the camera is static, I'm just using proxies to do the same thing. Now, as you can see here, we can clearly see that there's some penetration of the proxy to this curtain. So what we're gonna do is to simply modify the geometry of this proxy. So I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna grab a bunch of vertices. I'm gonna do this as soft selection so that I can modify this easier. I'm just gonna bring this in front. I could rotate it a bit and bring this further in front so that we get to cover this curtain from the point of view that we're seeing this right now, like that. So I can really wrap and modify the proxy because it's just simple geometry. You can model your own proxy to whatever you need. So now I have it warping around this character, and because this part is pretty much occluded and the character doesn't move much, there won't be any compenetration there. So let's look at our shot cam. There we go. We remove this penetration here, but we still need to paint a few things. So let's bring up our bleeding brush, and I'm just removing any detail to bring this more dreamy atmosphere to life. I'm gonna make the brush bigger. I don't know why I'm painting with such a small brush. There we go. And I think this is still having something there, but let's see. Yes. I'm gonna bring this vertex a bit further in. Yeah, now everything in the frame is encompassed by the proxy, and I can just continue painting. I kind of like having this palm here. We'll see if the art director likes it, but for me it looks kind of cool. Brings it a more oriental flair altogether. It also contrasts with some detail that we have on the right. So I'm gonna keep these things. There's just one thing that is disturbing me a bit here, is that the proxy can clearly be seen here. So I'm gonna bring this further to the front as well. Oops, I was in the wrong mode. I'm gonna bring this to the front a bit. There we go. All right, now that we have set up the background proxies, I'm gonna set up the foreground proxies. So there's some bleeding here that needs to happen. There's some bleeding here as well that needs to happen. And this is also gonna be done using proxies. As you can see, the proxy is already covering the arm. We could avoid doing that by painting each other object individually instead of using proxies. But since this is not seen from the camera view, this doesn't disturb us right now. So now that we have this, let's add some smaller proxies. I'm gonna create here another plane. Gonna bring this to the front, rotate it, make it bigger, like this. All right, I'm fine with the resolution because this is gonna be quite small. So I'm gonna go here, the resolution is fine. I'm gonna, however, delete any history. I don't think we deleted of the other proxies. Let me check, this one is deleted. Oh yeah, we did, because we just copied it over. Perfect, now I'm gonna pick this up and I'm gonna place one. Hopefully I get to see, yes, perfect. Okay, so this is gonna go somewhere like this, maybe a bit taller, and this is gonna go to the right. I'm gonna duplicate this and I'm gonna paste it on this side as well. Maybe make it like this, but a bit rotated, like so. And this guy is also gonna be a bit smaller. All right, and these are gonna be my two foreground proxies, for now at least. So I'm gonna pick them up, open up the material presets and assign them as a proxy. And I can come here and add some color bleeding. I want some variation in the color bleeding, so I'm gonna use this, just bleed. Now, because we're using a plane and I want something that looks more like a circle, I'm gonna use a cookie for that. So if I come here, select the proxy, go to the material properties, I have something called a cookie mask. And what a cookie mask does, it's a black and white texture that masks the effects. So whenever this texture is white, the effects are going to be applied. Whenever it's black, the effects are not going to be applied. So I'm gonna load this up. I'm gonna go to my cookie gradient. It's just a simple radial mask. I open this up and I enable it here. As you can see, the cookie is already applying the effect only in the middle of it. And this allows you to have a nice transition of whatever effects you're having. So I'm gonna have some more bleeding here. You can see the pants here are quite bled. And to find the center where most of the cookie is applied is very simple because it's gonna be your manipulator here. We can make this a bit bigger because it doesn't affect the rest. There we go. And we're also gonna add some pigment turbulence because why not? Have some more variation to it. Always helps. Making this a bit higher frequency, like so. And I'm gonna do something similar with this proxy here. Gonna assign a proxy material. We don't need this anymore. And in the proxy material, I'm gonna add a cookie mask. I take my cookie gradient and I'm gonna add some bleeding as well. I want to bring this further this way. I want to add some variation to it so that some parts are more bled than others. I can reduce the bleeding a bit, increase it here instead. Like so. I can do the same thing here, though. Because this is a very dreamy sequence, this is pretty much evenly bled. So I'm gonna push this up a little bit, reduce the noise. Yes, and I'm gonna add some pigment turbulence as well, like so. Alright, so this is our first pass of adding proxies to come closer to the end result. As you can see, the end result is a bit more saturated, so I'm just gonna cheat this a little bit and enable some post-processing here. I'm gonna add a bit of saturation. You can also have some very basic control here. You can remove the contrast if you want, make it a bit brighter or less bright. So it's just very simple filters, but sometimes they can become very useful. Just gonna add 1.1. Right now we have this. So I'm gonna take a play blast of this and then we're gonna continue in the next video. Just remember, you have done a lot of stylization work. Always, always, always open up the toolbox and export the stylization. It's very important because the stylization sometimes doesn't save within Maya because everything right now, especially, I mean, it does save with Maya, but some of the things that we're doing, they're not saved as reference edits. And because we're working with reference edits, you should export the stylization. Otherwise, it can be that your work is lost and we don't want that. In case you want to avoid that, just simply import all the reference files in or work with Alembic. That will make sure that the stylization is always saved with the scene. That's it. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified about future tutorials.